The SIG-Sauer Romeo 9T is the most expensive red dot on the market. Don't bother fact-checking that, by the way. I already know the Wilcox Boss XE costs a little bit more, but that has a built-in laser aiming module, so it doesn't really count. The Romeo 9T retails for a little under $4,000, which probably means none of you have one. But that's okay, because I also don't have one. This is a Neotech. I have had the chance to shoot with a 9T at a couple of industry range day events and talk to some of the guys who worked on the 9T project. So today we're going to talk about why SIG-Sauer designed the Romeo 9T, why it costs so much, and why you shouldn't feel left out if you can't get your hands on one. Let's get into it. This video is made possible by our channel sponsor, Venture Surplus. The cool thing about Milsurp gear and clothing is that the quality level is really high, but the prices are really affordable. The downside is that the camo patterns are usually dreadfully last season, and it might have been in contact with the skin of another person. But that's why Billy Mays invented OxyClean. Take, for example, the intermediate bag from the modular sleep system. These are a lot warmer and made a lot better than any brand new sleeping bag you'll find for the money, but it's possible someone once had impure thoughts while sleeping in it. Combine that with a surplus Gore-Tex bivy bag and you have a versatile sleeping system that will keep you dry and alive in cold weather. But it is UCP digital camo, so you won't be winning any fashion awards. Check out Venture Surplus for other cool Milsurp gear like this, and if you use the discount code in the video description, you'll save 10% on your order. And now, back to the video. The SIG-Sauer Romeo 9T is a dual reticle reflex sight that allows you to zero and toggle both reticles independently. One of them is red and gives you the options of a circle dot or a dot only, and the other one is green and is just a dot. The 9T kind of looks like the regrettable result of an affair between a SIG-Sauer Romeo 8T and an EOTech, but it's actually a different type of red dot design. I think it's best referred to as a prismatic design. Basically, instead of projecting the reticle forward onto a reflector lens from the rear of the optic, which would create a downrange visible signature, the 9T projects the reticles from the bottom of the optic. This is kind of similar to the way an EOTech works, but it's extremely similar to the way the Meprolite True Vision red dot works. I'm not sure if SIG did this specifically to eliminate the downrange signature, or if it was just the best way to get two independently zeroable reticles inside the body of one optic. Like all of SIG's new generation red dot designs, we can expect that the 9T will have insanely good passive night vision performance and long battery life. None of us will ever know for sure though, because it has an MSRP of $4,000. So why did SIG make this thing knowing that most likely there was no commercial market for it? The 9T was developed at the request of US Special Forces, specifically to pair with the SIG MCX platform in 300 Blackout for use as a sentry gun. The idea is that on approach to a target building, the Special Forces teams want to use subsonic ammunition to eliminate hostiles as quietly as possible in the open. Subsonic 300 Blackout ammunition isn't all that lethal, so they probably want to be able to ensure accurate headshots. Once on target, they switch to supersonic ammunition before making entry to the building, because supers are substantially more powerful than subsonics. Once they're inside, sound propagation over open terrain is no longer that much of a concern. Also, they've already made it to the objective, so things are probably going pretty good. We can probably assume that most of the ammunition carried by any guy with a 300 Blackout gun is going to be supersonic, and if they got into a firefight before making it to the target objective, they would probably just switch to supersonic right away.
Hi, Brassfake here, and welcome to my crib.
We have let's check out my dope rides.
Dude, I feel like I have like this.
Yeah, it's not attractive.
So if you have a reflex sight with two independently zeroed reticles, you can have one zeroed for supersonic ammunition and one for subsonic ammunition, and it doesn't compromise the zero of either. With just one reticle, you could zero for supersonic, but then you'd have some pretty extreme holdovers with subs, or you could zero for subs, but then your supersonic zero might be completely weird, and that may not be something that you want to do if you're going to have to take an offset shot at close range. A lot of the time, switching back and forth between subsonic and supersonic ammunition on a 300 Blackout gun is a matter of good enough. The Romeo 9T allows a 300 Blackout gun to have two perfect zeros.
Shoot each one once, okay, but notice where your hits go. Okay, now switch reticles. Yep. Try again. Okay, then switch reticles. There you go.
The two reticles are also visually distinct, so it's easy to see at a glance which one you're on. With night vision on, you no longer have the ability to differentiate between red and green, but with the red reticle set to the circle dot option, you can just tell by the shape. The Romeo 9T also has a dedicated night vision button, similar to the newer Romeo 4T Pro and 4XT Pro or an EOTech. The The behavior of the night vision button on a SIG optic is a little bit different than on an EOTech. Pressing the NV button drops the brightness of the SIG optics down into the night vision range, but pressing it when you're in night vision mode causes it to jump immediately to the highest level. Apparently this is a feature that was requested of SIG. The prospective buyer of the 9T wanted the NV button to work like a panic button. So if the shooter needs to take off their night vision and switch to white light, they can hit one button and immediately get a visible reticle. And they can worry about fine-tuning the brightness later. So why does the 9T cost $4,000? Some of it is just that this thing is very large and packed full of technology. You can kind of think of it like two Romeo 8Ts in the same body. So you do a little bit of Apple math, take the cost of an 8T, multiply it by 2, add $200, and you're almost halfway there. The Romeo 9T, like the 8T, the 4T Pro, and 4XT Pro, also has top-notch passive aiming capabilities, so that means really good glass encodings. And the last thing that makes the 9T so expensive is a huge amount of markup, as kind of a not-so-subtle way to say, look guys, this optic is not for you, please don't try to buy it because we don't really want to make that many of them. The commercial market for the 9T is very limited. Even if they sold it at half this cost, it still wouldn't move that many units, so it's probably not worth it to SIG to spool up production for the 9T so that they can sell a couple of them to weirdos like us. So if you're a 300 blackout junkie, what can you do instead? If you can't afford a Romeo 9T, or if SIG slipped another release date and it's not out by the time you're watching this video. Luckily, there are a lot of ways you can approximate the capabilities of the 9T without spending anywhere close to that much money. One classic option is to zero your gun for supersonic ammunition, and then when you're shooting subsonics, you just hold high. Obviously, this works a lot better if you have an optic with multiple reference points you can use for holds. I've made this work with a bunch of different optics. One of those is the Primary Arms GLX 2X Prism. You can zero it for supersonics and then figure out which holds you need to use for subsonics. It's not going to be exactly what's shown in the reticle manual, because the drops in the manual only properly work if you're actually zeroed for that ammunition at that range. And like most BDC reticles, it starts off being a little bit vague because there are so many different grain weights and velocities of supersonic 300 blackout ammunition. I've also done this with various red dots and holographic sights. Anything that has a circle dot reticle allows you to use the bottom of the ring as a reference point to make it easier to hold over consistently, or something like the SIG Romeo 8T, 4T, 4XT Pro, or EOTech 3-2 or 3-4 reticles that have additional drop dots you can use. If you have a plain old red dot, you can also just hold above the target, kind of in space somewhere, and you can kind of get pretty good at that, especially considering that your subsonic 300 blackout ammunition is probably not going to do much beyond 100 yards anyway. I'm going to do a little demonstration starting with the ammunition the gun is actually zeroed to. This is 125 grain supersonic. The optic is zeroed at 50 yards. This is an EOTech XPS 3-0 on a Unity riser. This is the Unity riser meant for the taller version of the EOTech, so rather than sitting at 226, this sits at about 193, which is just what I prefer. It's tall enough that we do have a bit of a exaggerated battle zero, more than you would with a flush mounted optic. That does help out a little bit when we're trying to take, center mass shots or center mass hold shots at longer range. So let's go ahead and start with this stuff. This is not the heaviest supersonic loads. If you buy bulk ammo, you probably end up with like 147 grain stuff, just using recycled 308 bullets. Got our steel at about 100 yards. Hope you guys can hear that. That steel is not very resonant. Up next, we have a couple rounds of Ammo Inc. Stealth Subsonic. This is a 220 grain ball load. This is very slow, weak ammunition. I've actually had trouble getting it to cycle even suppressed guns in the past, so that should give you an idea of just how much weaker it is. And we're going to just hold center mass on steel. I don't think that's cycled. So this stuff is so slow, so weak. It's not cycling this gun, and it also doesn't lock back even when it does manage to cycle. So all of these options will get you pretty close, which for shooting subsonics at close range is probably going to be good enough for most of us. But you can get more in depth with it. For example, using a scope like an LPVO, you can mark the turrets or write down the adjustments so that you can dial back and forth between your supersonic and your subsonic zero. You can also zero for supers and then work out a dope chart to figure out where on the reticle your subs are hitting at various ranges. Something I've seen recommended a lot is to have an offset or piggyback red dot zeroed for subs, and then your primary optic, whether it's magnified or not, is zeroed for supers. I don't personally like this idea because I think offset red dots are kind of difficult to use, and the extreme height over bore and the angle problem is going to make precision very difficult, so I think you'd just be better off estimating the holds. There's also a red dot mount, I think made by Spur, that can carry two aimpoint T2s in line with each other so you can have them both zeroed for different things. This sounds kind of terrible, and it also ends up being pretty freaking expensive, but I guess you could replicate the same thing just by putting two Romeo 5s back to back. So yeah, I can't afford a SIG Romeo 9T, but that's okay because I really never even wanted one, even for a second, despite being a pretty big fan of 300 Blackout. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, check the links in the video description, and I'll see you guys next time.